Hey everybody, welcome to our June 15th Tinderbox Meetup, and happy Father's Day to everyone. And for those that in whatever country, if you Mark Anderson, is Father's Day in the UK or is that a US thing? I don't remember. Um, Take him off, let him get off
No,
mute.
we have fathers here in the UK.
No, no, but is it on this day or do you guys celebrate it on a different?
No, yes, I think it is at the moment. But as
Okay,
I don't possess any small people, I'm not actually up with a hunt on that.
got it. All right. Well, welcome to the meetup. Typically, our method is to go around and have new people introduce themselves. We don't really have anyone new other than Andy Bland, who is our guest speaker for today. So, Andy's doesn't necessarily frequent the meetups that often, but we're really thankful to have him here today. If we have a theme like we do today with Andy, we jump into that theme. If we don't, we go around the room and we ask questions and talk about our individual projects we're working on. But without further ado, let's move right ahead. Andy's going to be talking to us about his work he's been doing using Claude and developing an MCP server to be able to have Claude AI integrate with ChatGPT. And Andy, before you share your screen, maybe you can
Hmm.
turn that off so we can look at your face a little bit more.
Oh,
Uh,
let's see if I can figure out how to do that now. Let's
uh,
see.
it's the little stop button right at the bar that comes across your screen. There we go.
Yeah, okay.
No, we're still seeing it.
Yeah. Say Zoom has changed its UI enough that I'm having some trouble here. Here we go. It used to be easier to stop the
Yeah,
screen
no, it's
share.
that little bar that comes across the screen and it just says stop on it.
Oh yeah, I got it. There we go.
All right.
It,
So
it hides itself. Yeah, sorry about that.
before you kick in and start showing us what you're
Yeah,
gonna, maybe you can preempt us to kind of tell us what we're gonna see, and then you can tell us so we can get a little our feet wet a little bit. And then
sure.
I'd love it if you can talk a little bit also about because as you were saying in the preamble to us turning on the recording, you use the different models at the same time. Sometimes you use Gemini for one thing, Claude for another, ChatGPT's sometimes in there in the mix. So could you talk about Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, what other AI models you use and why, and how they fit into the overall thing that you're going to be showing us? Can you also define what an MCP is? For those that may not be aware of that or have heard that terminology, and just kind of set the ecosystem landscape for us before we jump in.
Sure. So I'm a physician by training, kidney disease, nephrology, and being able to leverage AI to be able to figure out what it is that I want to do, accelerate learning, help me review complex literature, and be able to teach others is sort of how I stumbled into AI by training. I have a MBA and a master's in predictive analytics from Northwestern and have really kind of fell into AI. I tried it about 2 years ago and hated what they now call hallucinations, which the summary is it lies. And found that using it for medical stuff, it just lied way too much. It made up references that didn't exist. It made conclusions that didn't exist. It missed references and came back to it in the last 6 months or so. Tried out various different platforms. ChatGPT, I think, works well for revising emails and using, I'll use it to generate a resume or reference letters or things like that. I think Claude and its reasoning model really excels in complex technical issues. It is probably the best medical AI that is not 100% medicine focused. And I think Gemini doesn't do the world's best job at medicine, but it can when Claude gets stuck if you're trying to solve a data analytics or coding problem, does a good job. The thing I like about Gemini especially is it's a million token input. And so a token essentially is a word. And ChatGPT, Claude are about 128,000 words for input, whereas Gemini is a million. And so to sort of prove that, I actually put the Tinderbox way and put in the Tinderbox user guide into Google, had it summarize it, then move that over to Claude. Claude does a much better job strategic thinking and analyzing than does Google. And so those are the two AIs I use mostly, and have developed some prompt structures to be able to minimize hallucinations. And so something called a confidence analysis or matrix is something that I ask to do at the end of everything. And I say, if you're doing references, go do a confidence analysis or matrix on these references, and it will pick up the hallucinated references, and then I just have it revise and remove the references. So that I was doing a big review on a particularly complex topic. It continued referencing. It was reference 23, which was a meta-analysis it made up. And when I did the confidence analysis, I said, well, take that out of things and see where we're going. And it worked out really well. I actually pay for the max subscription of Claude because I use Claude multiple times a day, every day, to be able to solve clinical questions at the point of care. And so I love Claude. The other reason I love Claude is the ones who developed the MCP server. The MCP server allows Claude to connect to other applications. The one that was out and I sort of learned on was Claude to Obsidian. I use Obsidian sort of as my repository. And then what caused us to come to this meeting today is I used Claude, the MCP server, and to be able to write an MCP server to connect to Tinderbox.
Fantastic. And I had a question while you were talking about it. Oh, could you talk a little bit about your prompts too, just in general? So like, do you give it a role? Do you tell it like you're a practice physician with these board reviews? I mean, like how do you help it?
So I do, but I also select the professional response for Claude rather than the regular response. I found the educational response in Claude just makes me sick to my stomach because it's so it's so fluffy. But I do that. I also my prompts are long. So what I view AI as is a very smart, very fast, very young colleague. And so for me, it would be the combination of a first-year resident or a fourth-year medical student. And so if you ask it a simple question like review acute kidney injury, it's going to give you a very superficial review. But if you tell it what questions you want it to answer, it will give you great references. And so my prompts are long. By long, probably rather than a sentence, they're probably a paragraph. And so what I will tell you is if you don't know what it is you're researching, you're going to get some answers that may not be all that valuable. And so as a nephrologist, as a kidney disease, I know a lot about the literature. And so I continued to learn how to prompt because I knew what I wanted the answers to be. And so there'll be it's sort of an iterative prompting structure. There are some things I want to learn about, especially liver disease, that I don't know as much about. And so I sort of tried to leverage that and also go to other references and say, now tell me more about this or tell me about this. And so I'll let it respond. Depending on what I want, I will ask it either for bullet points or for a paper. Generally, what I find is about 20,000 words is about what I can really read in a short period of time. So I will say no more than X amount of words, 1,000 words if I just want something brief, 20,000 words if I want something that is referenced and cited to be able to share. And the other thing I like about the new versions of AI is they have what's retrieval archive generation or RAG, and that is the where it will go out to the internet. And so what I will often say is if I want something recent, I will say, focusing on references between 2020 and now, give me a review of this particular topic. And so that way I'm not getting the stuff that's already in its database from its learning from 2023. I'm picking up all the stuff from 2024, 2025.
Got it. And what about, how are you, and maybe you're not, but do you have any concerns about privacy or intellectual property leakage?
I do. I have. And so I'm asking general questions rather than having that. And so the next thing on my list to play with is figuring out the 70 billion token models and trying to do RAG to be able to go. The small token models, the 30,000 or 30 billion, et cetera, just don't have enough ability to ask those questions. And they are so memory hungry. And so, yeah, I haven't bought the M3 Ultra Studio with 512 gigabytes of memory to be able to run these. Because what happens when you use those, if you're using huge models, you have to use quantization. And if you're using quantization, you lose a lot of the specificity. And so what I'm waiting to do to be able to do that is having a huge, I think there's 100 billion token model that's out for DeepSeek now. And so I'm sort of watching and waiting to be able to do that. And then again, use RAG to be able to go out to the internet. Right now, I just anonymize it all myself. And so I don't say, Michael Becker is seeing me for this problem, tell me what's going on. But I will sometimes, in the EHR, if I'm looking to get an answer, just do a screenshot of the labs that are de-identified and say, tell me about what you think is going on with this particular lab set. So it is not, I don't put patient information or enough information that you could identify another human being in it, but I might share some very de-identified data.
Okay, and just to be clear, when you talk about this whole idea of 70 billion models, the 100 billion models, you're talking about building a local AI, buying a machine sitting on your desk and then hosting it locally so it's not going out to the.
Yes, and so using like whatever the graphical user interface, because I'm not a terminal guy really, is whatever it is, LLM Studio or whatever it is.
Studio LM, and then there was that
Yeah.
other one, Detlef. What was it? Anything LM? You had those two pieces.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So we'll put.
I just when I played with them, the answers they gave me, it was sort of like asking first graders to help me with medicine, and it just didn't help.
Got it. All right. So without further ado, that's kind of like the preamble setup kind of questions I wanted to ask you to wet our whistle, if you will. Does anybody else have any kind of generalized questions that we have for Andy, or should we let him jump right in and show us his toys?
I've one very quick one. I'm sorry, it's a noddy. This is kind of the first time around the boy question, because once you know. But just to fully understand, is the token talking about essentially the number of things in the database that you're looking at, or is it the number of things that you're passing into it?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. So there's input tokens and output tokens. And so part of the reason I got the max subscription is I think it's like $20 per million tokens of input and $15 per million of tokens output for Claude. And I am well exceeding the $200 a month I pay based on the conversations I'm having. And so it's actually more cost effective for me to use that. When I got the Pro, I was actually hitting limits within the first 2 or 3 hours of the day. And now I'm not hitting those limits. And when I looked at the amount of tokens I was using just by guesstimating, I'm like, I don't really want the API key to pay by token. And so a token by definition is about a word, but there are some words, probably about 2 syllables is a token. And once you get into bigger words than that, they'll charge multiple syllables per token. And it is not unusual that I will actually maximize the conversation thread and have to take something from the one conversation thread, move it into another, because I've used up all the input and output tokens when I'm having an iterative conversation with them. And I've learned kind of that along the way too, is making sure that after I've gotten a lot of response, to be able to say, okay, now let's wrap this up, create a summary that I can drag and drop into a new conversation, because I've run out of the tokens. Because with all of these, the reason there's a token limit is because Claude has to keep remembering everything in the conversation. There's nothing that stays within memory, and so you start a new conversation, you lose things, and you kind of lose that if you're having an iterative conversation. When you can say this or that, and it will go back and remember what it was you were just talking about. Whereas if you start a new conversation, you have to start all over again.
And a token really in many ways is the business model of AI. It's how AI companies are making money, correct?
It is.
And then I also heard the other day though too that certain models too can be overly influenced by tokens depending on how they're interjected. So like for example, I read a story the other day where the word Trump was over indexing in some models because of the popularization of that word, in general conversation. So it's interesting to see the effect of tokens on the model in general.
It is. And I think the last model that I use Perplexity as my general. It has replaced Google. I do not use Google anymore. I just go right to Perplexity and do my searching there. And it gives you great things. It gives you references. And it's a lot faster than Google and a lot more relevant. And I really like how it constructs like summary tables, et cetera, to be able to make sense of things. And so Perplexity is what I use when I have a question about, tell me about the restaurants in this city, rather than Claude. And Claude is what I use when I'm really doing a deep dive into technical.
Okay. So okay. And do you pay for Perplexity too?
I do. I bought it's $20 a month because I like the Pro, and the Pro version will actually generate spreadsheets now. That started last week, I think. And so all the others have a real hard time generating spreadsheets. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that and play around with the spreadsheet. They'll all generate comma separated values, but Perplexity does a fairly decent job. And I can write I've looked at writing an MCP for Perplexity, but I really haven't found a reason, because I don't really want to send all that to my knowledge vault, because I use it for asking more transient questions.
Or like a chum bucket. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. One comment. One thing I found too with that is I used we talked about this last week, I think. I used the section mark, and rather than getting spreadsheets back from the AIs, I asked it to give me a section mark delimited list. So I use the section mark as like a cell delimiter for a spreadsheet, and then I can pull those in, and then using Tinderbox stamps can parse out all of the values and populate Tinderbox attributes with that. So something to look at in the future.
All right. I've begun playing with Claude a little bit to be able to write some of the queries, because I'm really not a programmer. They call it vibe coding is what they call a lot of it. But one of the places I struggle with using Tinderbox is actually writing agents and figuring out how to do that. And I've begun sort of playing with Claude. It probably does the best job of all of them in beginning to write agents and actually understanding Tinderbox.
Awesome. Okay. Without further ado, let's let you kick it off.
All right. We'll see what happens here all right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I am, I think, Michael, you turned me on to the word, the artisanal software. I am a huge user of any software that is not generally available. I don't use Word. I don't really use Pages. And so the things I use is Obsidian, Tinderbox, DevonThink, Scrivener. I actually use Curio as well. And so what I tried to do is put together how it is I try to think through things. And Obsidian sort of sits as my knowledge repository, because I can use it on my phone, I can use it on my iPad, I can use it on my computer. It syncs amazingly well across all those devices. Claude will write right into Obsidian in Markdown, and it's a vault rather than a single file. And so that's sort of how I fell into the AI thing. And then Tinderbox, I think about for more comprehensive analysis. I'm still learning how to use Tinderbox. It is, I've got to flip the hood up and look at it and figure out how to write these queries and do things like that. But using the MCP to be able to move things back and forth. And then if I'm trying to write to publish, Ulysses and Scrivener are sort of where I am. The nice thing about being on the Mac environment with DevonThink is I can move. I can do a paper review and then have the paper stored in DevonThink because it's really the great way to do that. And then moving to PDF and HTML. One of my things on my list for this month is to figure out how to use something called Cloud Cannon, which is a HTML where I can generate the code in potentially Claude and move some of the resources that I'm generating from markdown files into something I can publish on the web so that students who are rotating with me, I don't send them a billion PDFs. I can just have them go. And I guess the last piece that I didn't put on here is I use Notebook LM a lot. And the reason
yeah,
go ahead.
A list of screens right now. We're just seeing like your text window and
Do you see this? Is this?
no, we don't see like a list of items that you're showing us.
Oh, okay. So let's see what happens here. It says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, we are seeing your screen, but
here we go. Let's see what this is. Let's see. Maybe there we go. Is that the right screen?
That's the right screen. Yes.
There you go. All right. So so this is sort of my thinking of sort of research discovery. Claude probably sits in the first one. I am a fan of trying to use Curio. I'm still trying out how to do this. It's Claude and Gemini moving into Obsidian and then moving things back and forth from Obsidian to Tinderbox because Tinderbox is more of a file than a vault. And so you have to have a particular file open to do that. When I have files open on more than one computer, I find that I get I get conflicted file savings. And so Obsidian, I don't get that. So it's figuring out how to do this. And then Ulysses I use for some of the focused writing. I really like Scrivener to be able to send stuff, try to archive some of this in DevonThink, and then talking about the HTML. And so it's sort of what I'm thinking about this. And then this is an example of what I've done for nephrology for first year students is rather than a PDF, this is an HTML. And so you can click around and look at this. You can also search particular topics if you want to search the guide for something. And so this is right now just an HTML, but what I'm hoping to do in the next 2 weeks is put this up on a website that I can point students at. I think Hugo is the website creation that I'll use in using Cloud Cannon. I think because I can put all these preformed HTMLs in a file, use GitHub to move them up, and then be able to update them. And so I really, Claude took the essentially the book and turned it into this, and I really do like this. This is some of the the visual rather than having to use words to describe this is just incredibly powerful when educating. And so that's sort of how
I'm sorry, you're saying Claude built this page for you?
It did. And so what happened is I took the markdown of this review from Obsidian. This is my Obsidian vault. And so let's see here. So this is the technical, here's the clinical, and your nephrology student references. This is the entire book chapter. And I just copy and pasted that into Claude and said, generate an HTML textbook for students. And this is what it came up with for me. And so, and this is all HTML code. I can download it and move it into a HTML web page, put it up on a server. And then, what I also have done with this is you can feed these texts into Notebook LM, which will create a 2-person conversational podcast. And then I can download that and put that up. And so if people are mobile, they can download and listen to that. And so that is sort of how I'm trying to build taking this knowledge, turning it into information and allowing people to learn from it.
Okay, and then one question, how are you managing citations in this process?
Yeah, so I just tell it to generate citations. And so so here you're not going to see as much, but let's take a look at so here's a sodium lecture. Let's see here. Here, comprehensive, maybe. And you can see, this is a really long paper. And Is this the literature review? Yeah, here's the literature review. And so here's the citations just coming right out of Claude. And so
And do you bother to validate those, or you kind of already
I
know?
do. And so what I have done with this is where I use a matrix and say, do a confidence matrix on these and tell me if they exist or don't exist.
Okay.
And so trying to think if I've got a good one that is. So here is a report on heart failure and kidney disease. And this is the confidence matrix that I have. And so here it's renal, randomized controlled, high, consistency with other evidence, level of evidence high. And so what it does is it will go out and find all of these and ensure that they actually exist. And the prompt I use, and here's all the prompts I used for this: review the medical literature from 2020 onwards, including Greg Fonerow, who's really good at this, and see if there's a difference between this, give the absolute risk improvement. And then here they said, I can do something for you. And I said, well, let's do that rather than having to type the whole thing over again. The art study was a big study. There was a study that looked at one particular medicine called Top Cat, and I was able to just say, go find these. And so you can say, combine this into a comprehensive report with citations and a reference page. And then add the tables to the thread, add a confidence matrix, review the literature, and at the end of the report, add an appendix, including all prompts in the thread. And so you can see this was a 27 prompt conversation that I used to be able to walk through this. And again, if you just said, tell me about heart failure and kidney disease, you would get something very different than looking at this. So you have to have some subject matter expertise. AI doesn't replace subject matter expertise. What it does is augments this, because this would take me a year to be able to put together without. But these are all questions I know the answers to, or had some idea, or knew another reference that referenced it. And so I could say, put all this together in one comprehensive document to be able to talk about. And
can you finish that sentence? So AI does not replace subject matter expertise, but what does it do? It augments.
It accelerates. It basically gives me a tireless research assistant that I can direct to do this. And if it's doing a long literature review, I can go see a patient, come back, get the literature, look at it, and then go see another patient, and then have it refine it to be able to do this. And so I'm still responsible for the content, but I actually can talk about what all this looks like and get answers. And so there are some medical online textbooks, but they may not answer my question. And so I can say, look, I need an answer to this question. Go review the literature, give me the best guess. And it does a really good job of saying this is a practice rather than having evidence. And so it's an amazing help to me to be able to, in real time, take care of patients, make clinical decisions, and then have the evidence and be able to preserve the evidence. Because, when you look at all of my conversations, I have 418 previous chats with Claude in the last view all here. In the last 2 months. And so if I had to look at all of these to be able to figure out where it all is, that doesn't help. But what I can also do is say, find in my vault the files on hyponatremia. And then it will go look in my vault and find me all of those files. And so it'll do a simple search. And then it's going to show me all the files that are there. And it takes a little while. So it doesn't replace, and this is where I think Tinderbox is probably faster, is once I learn how to generate reports, I can find things. But here you can say, here are the main files that it's found. It summarizes what those files look like.
But you also have the potential of a privacy or IP leakage here, because now you have Claude looking at your Obsidian vault. So you have to be careful what you have sitting in your Obsidian vault.
Yes, I mean, but I will tell you that I have that privacy problem everywhere. I mean, if someone wants to figure out my bank account number, they're going to figure out my bank account number wherever it is, because I use online secure site. And so do I think that you have to be careful? Yes, you do have to be careful, but I think fearing data loss in this is, you're depriving yourself of a tool. It's basically saying, I'm not going to use online banking. I'm only going to write checks and go to the bank because I'm afraid that someone could hack my account. That is a valid thing, but you lose a lot of other things when you make that determination. So you can say, I won't use AI, just like I won't use anything electronic. I'm going to have all of my stuff air gapped, so I can't connect to anything. You're going to lose a lot of power in your ability to make decisions.
Mhm.
So
Perfect.
should you put your social security number in here? No. And what Claude's terms of use says is that it doesn't use any of the data to be able to form its servers. That's not like Adobe, where Adobe says they're going to use everything you create with their AI as their property, whereas Claude says that's not true. Are they lying? I don't know. Apple says they're not, but maybe they are. I mean, so anything you're using on any device could be discovered at any time by anybody.
Perfect.
And so, and then I can say something like this: transfer. Let's do. So I have a Zettelkasten in files. I call in a ZK folder. So now I'm saying go to my Zettelkasten folder, find the ones related to hyponatremia, move them to Tinderbox, and now it's going to search all of that. And so here's the Tinderbox file I have open. The earlier prompt I had was find 10 on cardiorenal disease and move these notes over. And so it just moves all of these notes over. And so now it's doing the same thing. Here are the 10 most relevant files. I'm going to move them over into Tinderbox.
And so that's the MPC, right?
That is the MPC working. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And is there something that how did you go about creating this MCP?
Yeah, MCP. So I actually put the Obsidian MCP in the code and in the Claude, and I said generate one for Tinderbox based on this. But I want you to use Python. I want you to use Homebrew Python. And then I've actually revised this because you have to do a code to actually break the container. And I said, now use it to set up a virtual server. And now I have an MCP that will go through and do all of the virtual server.
And the virtual server is hosted on your laptop, or?
Yep, it's hosted on all of my devices, and it's hosted within the root directory, and it's running self-contained without jailbreaking anything, because I got a little nervous about breaking something, saying, am I sacrificing security? So I went back and revised that to be able to say maybe not. And so now, let's see what it's put in here. So here are the hyponatremia pieces that it's bringing over. And so now it can bring all that stuff into, and it takes a little while to make the notes. You can see here it is creating the notes to bring across. And so the reason I brought in these ahead of time was to be able to show you that it brings them essentially across, has the note And it just gives you, these are my ZK cards that I had it make. And so every time I write something or do something with Claude, I will tell it to then create 15 or 20 Zettelkasten cards regarding regarding this document. And then if it misses something that I think is important that I put in there, I'll say add this to the ZK cards.
Okay, and then what do you do with it once you have it in Tinderbox?
I don't know. So the reason that I just made this is I wanted to figure out how to use Tinderbox. And again, where I struggle a little bit is Tinderbox is so powerful and has so much programming that it overwhelms me. And so when I took your course, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to use this. But with AI, I'm thinking about how do I write agents to be able to say, find these thoughts. And so I don't have to rely just on AI to do this. I can say, let's set up a programmatic way to be able to look at this and figure out how these thoughts relate. And so I played a little bit with an agent that talked a little bit about the powerhouse of the cell called the mitochondria, and it figured out a lot of different places within all of my notes where the mitochondria is important in a disease process and connected some things that I didn't see before. So so what I'm trying to figure out, what I'd hoped is that Tinderbox could help me publish and I could turn all this into HTML and just hold it all there. It does good with text, but it doesn't do as good with the diagram. So it did pretty good with this, but with this, it just was able to take the words when I copy and pasted the HTML in. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out
You say
how to work that.
You meant Tinderbox.
Tinderbox. Yeah. And so what I did is I downloaded this, dragged it in, and it didn't work. Then I went back to Claude, took the code, copy and pasted it. It didn't draw it. Tinderbox wasn't able to draw this, but it kept the words. But when I'm importing things that are words only, Tinderbox does great. And I'm sure it's my inexperience with Tinderbox as to why that doesn't work. Because some of the stuff that you guys have set up regarding agents and how things set across and all of that is frankly amazing. And I just haven't gotten to the level of complexity or mastery of Tinderbox yet.
Well, on that note, two things do come to mind. One is, in Tinderbox, my 5C school, I've got tables, indexes now, and working with media and all that. So that could be helpful for your publishing system. I'll drop it in the chat. Chuck just launched his new diagramming tool this morning. So that could help creating the kind of diagramming image you see there. Plus, you could use tools like Mermaid to automatically generate that diagramming tool. So I wonder if you could ask Claude to say, generate me a mermaid diagram, and that could be rendered in Tinderbox very easily. So that could be something to consider as well.
I agree. And so again, I'm very early in the journey with this. The other thing I did is I wrote a plugin for Obsidian that will go to my Apple Calendar and scrape all of my events for the day and put them in and create a link that I can click on that has meetings and then file the meetings. And so, it's just, and I have written but not yet deployed that for Tinderbox. It was easier to write because of the interface. Tinderbox's programming language versus Electron. I think it was easier for Claude to figure that out. And so I'm still really new in figuring out how all this fits together but what I will say is that this combination has accelerated my knowledge management and learning, probably, not joking, 100 to 1,000-fold depending on the topic.
Now, and you talk about not being a coder, and yet this feels a lot like coding. So how do we juxtapose that?
Yeah, I'm a hacker. And so I know enough about Python to open it up and to understand what everything looks like. I know enough about R to be able to look at that. I know enough about HTML to be able to figure all that out. But if syntax, I took a Python course and it just nearly killed me because commas and tabs and all this kind of stuff. I was like, I don't really care about any of that at all. What I care about is being able to actually do something. And so what AI has allowed me to do is actually begin working through that, look at it, figure out what's happening. The debugging stuff is amazing. There were times in this course that I'd have a comma that was in the wrong place, or a tab or a space that wasn't in the right place, and nothing would run. And uh, and then uh, it was, you know, Google. I would say that this is where I think Gemini really helps. I ran into a couple of problems trying to do the calendar plugin for Obsidian, and Claude was stuck, and I moved it over to Gemini and said, "Come up with a new way to do this." And they're like, "You know what the problem is that you guys are using .js to be able to do this. There's an entire new interface that that Apple is using. Let's write this in that." And that was something I didn't know anything about, and suddenly there it is. And when we'll see what I got here. Let's see. So here's my note, and insert calendar events. And so what it does is goes to all of my calendars that I have open, and says, I've got a lot of holiday calendars, but it's time to give my dog the tick and flea medicine. Here's this meeting. It actually kept the join the Zoom meeting, so I can click on this hyperlink. And all this is a plugin I wrote with the assistance of Claude and Gemini. And so I say, well, let's talk about this meeting. And it says, let's create the note. And here's the note template. And it puts it down in the meeting note template, meeting notes in my vault that I can find to be able to look. And so I really, again, I think that Tinderbox will probably do a lot more for me as I work through all this, but Obsidian is where I really have sort of cut my teeth. And so it's figuring out how all of that fits together. And I also am very grateful to this community, because you guys have sort of done the meta work for me about thinking how to think. And so watching videos, doing your class, watching these meetups has really changed how I think about thinking. And so whatever I can do to help the community continue to develop, I'm very much engaged in, because of what you guys have given me.
Awesome. By the way, I don't want to monopolize this. Anybody else have any other comments, questions, inputs? I've been kind of monopolizing all of it.
I've got one quick point for Andy. I heard your point about sort of action code sort of seeming a bit odd, and I put a note in the sidebar. It's an accidental thing, because essentially Tinderbox never really started out with any sort of automation. It had export code, because that's one of the things back in 2000 when this was being written that Mark Bernstein wanted to do. Blogging was a thing back then, and that was really one of the drives. And some internal macros have grown into this sort of slightly Byzantine thing, this action code. And if it has lots of sort of dark corners, it's mainly because we users keep asking the developer, can we have this? Can we have that? And so it is confusing in the way that it probably looks like a lot of things. My observation is the people probably who get most confused are those who have a deep background in some form of programming, because it looks like something they think they know, and then it turns out not to be. Whereas if you start from the premise of not really understanding, if you start from the fact it's all just magic, it's almost easier to just accept that it is what it is, and it has some arcane rules of its own. And I only mention that because I do sometimes see the sense that I'm not understanding this because I'm not learning the right sort of, I'm not reading the book right. In fact, there really isn't a book. And well, so some of the notes in ATBRef are essentially, it's about as close as we get to having something. And even that is mainly a list of exceptions.
Yes. And I did have, when I did a summary, I had Google go scrape that and combine it with the other, with the Tinderbox way and with the Tinderbox user manual to be able to pull key points out of it. And so it sits in my vault. Oh, here's a great question here. If I give a good textbook to AI and generate a website, the quality is likely to drop. That is true. What I want to say is that every textbook, when it's published, is already outdated because it takes 3 to 5 years to make a textbook. And so the hopefully medicine doesn't sit still and move forward. And so, and also there are things that people aren't willing to talk about within textbooks that are actually, you can be book smart and clinically dumb. And so what this allows me to do is actually by prompting to be able to take real world experience, figure out where the literature is and what's practice variation, and then figure out how it all comes together. And then I can go update it. And so medical textbooks are outdated the moment they're published. And in medicine, it takes for innovation to work, it takes about 17 to 18 years for best practices to move outward. And the reason is that medicine, I think, has three sciences: basic science, which is the anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology; the clinical science on how do you use this in patients; and then implementation science, which is how do you use this in people? How do you actually get this rolled out without designing $1 million clinical trial and actually able to use this in practice? And that I think this closes the implementation gap because you can actually talk about the real problems that you have when using these medicines, how to mitigate them, and how to create safety for patients. And so I think that for medicine, I can't speak to other textbooks. I don't usually read any others. That the textbooks in medicine aren't very good because they don't actually answer how to practice medicine, whereas I can use my experience as practicing, combine it with the evidence, and combine it with the recent literature to be able to give that and accelerate students' learning without them having to read something that doesn't actually talk about how to do this in real life. It's a great question.
What I'm hearing you say is, in some ways, and I try to do this with my marketing students, you've got implicit knowledge, explicit knowledge, and procedural knowledge.
Yep.
Are all really important, but the practicality is you really need implementation procedural knowledge if you're going to be able to work when you get out of school.
There is. And so, for example, there's a set of medicines, it's called guideline-directed medical therapy. And when you give it to people with heart failure and kidney disease, you can extend their life 3 to 8 years. The number of people you need to treat to save one life is 3.4. It's probably the 3.9. It's probably the lowest or the most effective set of medicines. But if you don't know how to use them, you kill people. And when you start killing people, you stop using the medicines because one, patients lose faith in you, and two, you lose faith in the medicines. And so that's the implementation science part of this. And they're very simple changes, but they're paradigm changes. And if you can actually break the trail for people to actually use them, you create a huge difference and you accelerate people's learning and implementation. And so, and you lose patients if people stop. But I think that those are places within medicine that this really hits a sweet spot. And again, it really, because now what's happened is what you'll see with those prompts that you saw with the heart failure stuff. That's all my practice. That's how I practice medicine. You're not going to find any of that in a medical textbook, and you're not going to find any of that in the medical literature. It's how I've taken the medical literature and the pathophysiology and apply it to patients in real world. And now I can share that with other physicians to be able to ramp up their learning curve.
Fantastic. And are there, I've heard about like their board certified AI stuff for physicians and all of that. Have you looked into that? Like, how do physicians get and bring in AI, and how do they cite AI when they're using it?
So I think that's pretty new. And so there are, there's still some people who believe that if you use AI, that's cheating. I'm not sure that that's the case. What they require is a thing saying that this is AI assisted. And so I think I have an AI assistant prompt in here. Let's see. So the literature review on this topic was prepared with the assistance of AI. AI was used to organize, synthesize information from the medical literature. I've thoroughly reviewed all the content, verified the citations, and validated the clinical conclusions in this document. This document should be considered a clinician-reviewed literature synthesis that leveraged AI as a research tool while maintaining appropriate clinical oversight. So, something that I treat a lot is high potassium levels. High potassium levels can stop your heart. And so when I initially did the review, I'm like, man, I don't really like this review. And um, what what I usually start saying is, okay, now let's take this and talk about this. They say dialysis is the most effective way to lower potassium. Well, that's not true. If you have to put a line in them, then wait for the dialysis nurse to drive in from Mount St. elsewhere, then hook them up to the machine and then lower their potassium. There are other more effective ways. And so those prompts, from my experience, will change how I'm asking AI to do this. So there will be a thing saying, calculate the delay gap from, or comment on the delay of having to do all these things before you put a patient on dialysis. Now compare it to the use of this drug, which lowers potassium in an hour. Compare it to the use of this therapy, which is, if you have this problem, causes an immediate improvement. And you don't find any of that within the medical textbooks. That's a knowledge synthesis that you have to put together. But if you're thinking about all of that, you can put it together into one document and then use that to teach the nurses, the ER physicians, the hospitalists about what it is you need going forward. You're right, 20% of medical practice is based in science because humans don't come with owner's manuals. I ask for one every time I see people, and I sure would like to know which page to turn to. Since I didn't design you, I don't know how you all work. And because you're complex enough individuals with your own genetic code and own environment, I don't know exactly how each particular medicine is going to impact you. And so what you need is someone around to be able to do this. And so this is where I get really worried when people say AI can replace physicians. They can't, because taking all of that together is what I do on a daily basis. It can certainly provide recommendations and help me understand the guidelines and what guidelines to implement. But when those go wrong, I can't look at you and say, sorry, too bad, so sad. I hope you have a good rest of your life, because you're my patient. It's my job to make you better. So when those fail, I have to understand all that background to be able to say, here's how all that works. And so I don't think, I think AI will replace guideline-driven practice. What it won't replace is the subtleties. Yeah, I like just replace part number 321. I'll tell patients, I'm like, I'm trying to understand what's going on with you. Could you bring your owner's manual in? Because I'd really like to know which fuse to reset. And that really helps patients, I hope, understand that they are a complex machine which was not designed and built by humans. So we're trying to figure all this out. So I like the comments in the chat. Thank you for being engaged. It makes it a lot easier for me to chat about this.
And what about especially in the world of medicine? Do you say AI is not going to replace the physician, but how does a newly minted physician? It's like in the context of business too. They often talk about, that those early stage young business careers are being just decimated. But then how is someone going to learn if they can't actually practice?
I agree, and so that's
balance
yeah.
this?
So I think that AI has several different places that it can succeed in that. One is simulation. And so you don't have to hurt real people while you're learning. You can hurt fake people. And so you get a chance to come in, take care of people. It doesn't have to, you can make decisions. They can have bad outcomes. You can learn from those bad outcomes. Whereas on humans, you can't do that. But on simulated patients, you can. I think AI can help set up some of those simulations and create them as HTML files that students can work through. I think you can create cases that they can work through as well. For the procedural stuff, I think you can create artificial mannequins that you can choose to operate on. I think there's a lot of potential with that. And then I think the other place is being able to take 25 years of experience, distill it down into documents that they can take with them, rather than having to rotate with the same person over and over and over to be able to do that. And so really what you're talking about is force multipliers. And that I think AI is a huge force multiplier in medicine.
Fantastic. Now we've got a couple of questions for you. Can you talk about systems flow? Like what's the difference? And maybe I was just thinking about this yesterday in cybersecurity. The optimization of any one individual element versus the optimization over the overall system. And sometimes having an individual element less optimized enables for the overall optimization of the system. Can you talk about some of those ideas?
Are you talking about regards to patient care or physician training or?
All of the above. Just it was one of the, from Roger Alexander. He went, can Andy share his knowledge on system flow diagram and associated notes, and maybe just systems in general as you think about how you integrate this into your work?
Yeah, so well, there are so many different facets to that. And so what I will say is that turning AI into something that can be used as a system, I think really is talking about local LLMs so that they can be confidential with confidential RAG, going out and getting the latest evidence, and then being able to share patient-specific information, the entire chart, and then come back with recommendations, as opposed to what I'm doing is I'm just going and asking a clinical question. And so I think and so when the models get big enough to be able to host it locally, to be able to give information and research to literature, I think that is, in my mind, the where this system is going. For now, what it is me asking generic clinical questions and trying to help physicians figure out how to leverage those questions so they don't get garbage answers. And so, talking about the GIGO um, uh, issues with regards to, patient system flow. Boy, humans are complex, and so I think that being able to use AI to detect changes in patients. So imagine that you're home with heart failure, kidney disease, and that one of the things I'm trying to do is take fluid off so you can breathe. Imagine having an AI generated bot text you or call you and ask you what your weight is every day, and then being able to move that into the electronic health record and flagging me to be able to notify me that, hey, look, he's gaining too much weight and therefore he's going into heart failure, or he's losing too much weight, he's going to get dehydrated and go into kidney failure. And then being able to show me all the medicines that you're on that could be affecting this so that I can then pick those medicines and adjust them. That's all stuff I do manually now. It takes 60 clicks to be able to navigate all of that, and I have to be in the EHR. And so imagine a system that combined clinical patient data with, and the theory that does this, I think, won a Nobel Prize. It's called nudging theory. Imagine being able to nudge patients to be able to get that information, and then using an AI generated to be able to say, these people are in trouble and we need to reach out to them immediately to prevent a hospitalization or them having a crash. And so I think that, when I think about the systems, I think about integrating with patient knowledge. I think about integrating with the clinical laboratory knowledge. I think about integrating with patient conversation. I think about being able to bring all that knowledge in a dashboard in front of a provider to be able to make those decisions. And so, am I answering your question? I'll pause there.
It's actually David. Yes, it's David. Roger's question as well. So, Roger, maybe you can chime in. And then we had one from Chuck as well. Could you comment on where is it in the chat? Could you comment on what challenges you have in de-anonymizing the data?
So, taking screenshots of just numbers is probably as close that I want to get to the chart. When you begin putting in clinical details, when you begin copying specific history and physicals, when you begin putting in particular medicine combinations, when you begin putting in assessment and plans that talk about individual characteristics, that is all dangerous, I think. And so that's information I don't think people want out there. And to me, this is where I think having the local LLMs being able to take that and then creating a good protocol to anonymize the data for internet calls really makes a huge difference. And so right now, that's all manual for me. It is me saying, I have a patient who has this problem. Now let me go figure out what this problem is. And then saying, how would I teach this to somebody else? And so we're not at the point where I think these LLMs can solve individual patient problems for physicians just because of HIPAA and all those issues.
By the way,
So- If I could follow up on that, part of the reason I asked the question was to try and understand the dividing line. You have, a wealth of patient record information available online these days, but it's interspersed with lots of information that can be used to identify the patient. And you've got an AI tool and possibly other places where you want to put information, but you don't care about the identity of the patient. You care about the relevance of the data. And so I could see a situation where the Epic and other health record systems provide you with screens or with data that is de-anonymized before you work with it, or an AI system that can run a filter and de-anonymize before it accepts the data and processes it. And I would love to hear your insights on which way you'd like to see that go.
I would love for an EHR that I could have an AI prompt within an EHR and say, help me figure this out. I don't understand what's happening here. And for AI to come back and say, we have out of 60 million patient records, we have 4 people who've had this, and here's what they've been diagnosed with. That would be amazing. And then being able to, again, the issue is that they have to go out and do calls because medical literature evolves. And so you don't really want to know how this was treated in 1990. You want to know how this is treated in 2025. And so you have to have some sort of ingestion engine that's going to pull that medical literature in and be able to look at it. And again, you have the GIGO problem, is that the data in Epic is all over the place. And so when you look at trying to do clinical studies and clinical analysis with that data, it's impossible to actually put something together. The reason why most medical studies and talk about outcomes use billing data is because billing data is selected and it's a particular code, whereas it's really hard to figure that out. I worry a little bit about some of Epic's models. The AI model, one of their sepsis prediction models, actually got called out by one of the leaders in the field because it's a black box. And it turns out that the biggest risk for having severe infection is being treated for a severe infection. Well, no duh. And so if you don't actually understand how that model works, you end up making really bad decisions. One of the biggest risks when we created a model for heart failure, one of the biggest risks for having heart failure mortality was being on medicines for heart failure. Well, that doesn't help. And so it's how do you actually get to the clinical data? And this is where you need clinical experts to be able to say, this is begging the question. You don't need this. It doesn't tell you anything new. Being on medicine for heart failure and being at risk for heart failure mortality is a no duh. And so what is it? And so there's a guy at Intermountain Health, Ben Horn, who actually put together a really great predictive model that I don't have any idea why it works, but it works amazing at predicting heart failure mortality. It tends to predict heart mortality for lots of different things. And so it's figuring those things out and then saying, how do you extend them going forward with patient information? And then it's also, accounting for intuition and spidey sense is having 25 years of experience and saying this person's going to have a bad outcome unless we do something. If there's nothing in the outcome to be able to do that, Epic tries to do that with their deterioration index. They try a good job to be able to predict, but some of those things that predict, again, this is the one that actually said the biggest risk of deterioration from sepsis is being treated for sepsis, being on IV antibiotics, and so it's having people who have the multiple headsets in the room to be able to have the conversation, because a data scientist isn't going to be able to tell you that this is ridiculous, and a physician isn't going to be able to tell you that what this model is predicting and what it is and what it looks like is wrong. And so again, I think there's a lot of people who think AI is going to solve all our problems, but it's having people who are AI facile who are able to actually understand what it is that AI is telling them and why it's telling them. Not that I have strong opinions about this.
All right. Anybody else have any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, I was just thinking, listening to this. I mean, obviously we have a slightly different structure here in sort of UK, in that essentially we the public own the data. So it's you might say a different model. One interesting that came out sort of accelerated by COVID was that essentially, I can't remember, they call them something like trusted harbors. The idea is that there's somewhere that you can go essentially run your query. So this could be an AI thing rather than a clinical trial. You get an answer, but what you don't get is to take any data. You get the answer to your question, but you own nothing because it's not your data. This would probably stick in the craw of commercial organizations who are going to wonder how they're going to make their money. But nonetheless, it seems an interesting way. So in that context, if the AI is inside that structure, and interestingly, one of the things when they set it up was that there should always be an uneven number, so you don't get in a sort of bot fight between two bots and none wants to yield. So essentially, you've got a chance that you're going to get a 2 out of 3 decision, which is interesting as well. But it does seem, in a general sense, that one useful thing might be to move some of the AI sort of function sort of inside that wire to move the problem of confidentiality.
It is. And the issue is you have to train it on something. And so that's the issue is what is the gold standard? What is the sensitivity, specificity, all the things that you do in medicine. And it's really that training on something that is a huge issue. I like the GIGO, garbage in, gospel out. That makes me smile. We call that in medicine eminence-based medicine as opposed to evidence-based medicine, as you listen to the person who has the highest academic degree. So, and your EHR is filled with garbage. Just look at, if you download your chart, every note every day is like 15 pages long, and there's about half a page that is actually relevant to what your care is. It's just pulling in different data elements. Look at your problem list sometime, and you'll be like, that problem was resolved a year ago, and it's still on your problem list. And so that's part of the issue, is that the data integrity is not very high because the people who are expected to keep it don't understand what the value of it is.
By the way, I have another question for you. Your comment you made earlier stimulated a thought for me. How does the fact that you're a teacher facilitate your ability to do your work? So, and let me preface this with a comment I've had a lot. Bernard Shaw had his 1903 play Superman, where he says, "Those who can do, those who can't do, teach." And that's bothered me most of my life until I changed the quote to "Those who can do, those who can't do, teach. Those who want to make a difference in the world do both." So the question I have is like, to what extent does teaching actually facilitate your ability to both be a good, essentially a good practitioner? Or does it?
It does. And so my one sole academic paper until last year was about who really is an expert. Is it academic or private practice physicians in being able to solve real problems? I think academic physicians are challenged by the amount of service they have and the amount of experience they have being able to teach. I think private practitioners are challenged by the amount of time they have taking care of patients to be able to teach others to take care of it and feeling like they can't keep up with the literature. I think someone who's doing both, and this is where AI really helps me, is I'm able to keep up with the literature and I'm able to teach. If you can explain something to your patient or to a student, you have mastered that topic, because if you can make it easily understandable, I think that requires mastery. As simplification of complex topics is a sign of mastery. And so being able to distill it down, and I think that's one thing that teaching has really kind of helped me with, is being able to, rather than walk around and talk about and use words that no one can understand, is how do I translate this into English for people to get?
And do you have a method that you've developed for yourself, or a best practice that helps you with that?
Yeah, I do. I ask questions. And so I'll say to a patient, what is it? Why did you end up here? And I say, here's why you ended up here. What is it that your creatinine means? It means that it's a waste product that your muscles put in your blood, and your kidney's job is to clean it out. And sort of like it's like dirt. And so the higher the number, the dirtier your blood, the less work your kidneys are. And so it's going through those questions with patients and saying, why would I take these medicines? What does this lab mean? This medicine helps with this lab. This is why we follow it. And so I do a lot of sort of iterative conversations with patients and walk them through the questions that I'm trying to answer. And that if there are patients who like that and understand it, and there are patients who just feel comfortable that someone's having the conversation with them and seems to know what they're talking about.
Got it. All right. Peter, you're always good for a good comment. What's your reaction, and how might you integrate some of this into your work?
Well, mostly I'm using it to help in design problems for programming projects, using local LLMs. I don't want to get another monthly bill for yet another service provider up in the cloud. So everything I do, I want to have running on my Mac, and also know that I can be disconnected from the internet at the time and not have to worry that it's going to be running off and leaking what I'm typing in as training data for some corporation to be able to get rich off of my genius.
Got it. Yeah, and how does that actually work, Andy? In the sense of, in your experience, the difference between how do you distinguish between the training data, your prompts, your knowledge, and the stuff that it's pulling, the RAG stuff it's pulling in, and how do you make the distinction between the two?
Yeah, I think this goes back to AI and expanding AI beyond LLMs. Is that LLMs only know what they're trained on, and then they have to go look and do this. And so they're using, associations and neural networks, which are really hard for people to understand. And AI, that's why AI makes stuff up. And so I think there's an entire other set of AI, which is the data analytics piece and being able to develop models that predict things. And that I think that we are enamored with LLMs because they're easy to use. You can download it, fire it up, get what you want. I think that what you're talking about is how do you use data to develop predictive models that help say that there's a problem that's going to happen. And so I think that goes into math, talking about C-stats, area under the curve. It talks about how do you validate models with confidence. One really interesting way. And so one model that was used to predict pneumonia in emergency room patients was incredibly accurate. When you actually pop the hood of the model, what it found is if you do a portable chest X-ray rather than standing up and doing a 2-view chest X-ray, that was the thing that was most predictive. It doesn't actually say you have pneumonia. It just means you're too sick to stand up. And so it turns out that people who have pneumonia in the ER are too sick to stand up. And so, but if you look at that and it says everybody who has a portable chest X-ray has pneumonia, you find that the prevalence of pneumonia in ER patients is way higher than you'd expect. And so it's figuring out how to use predictive modeling to actually answer those questions that make sense. It would pretty much be like saying, well, we're going to predict whether you're having a car accident, because when you drive, 99.9% of the time you don't. We'll just say you're not going to have an accident today. And so it has to do with actually looking at the data, interpreting the data. And this is where I think EHRs are horrible, is that the data is really hard to actually get out, because your blood pressure may be stored in 4 places in there. Your blood glucose levels may be stored in 8 different places. And so you've got to go find all of those to be able to do that. And so I think the predictive and preemptive algorithms that AI may be able to do are going to be much more powerful than LLMs in helping advance data-driven fields.
And again, what are your thoughts on how we distinguish between the two responses? Like, how do we know when one is an historically based response versus one that's more predictive? And what are the UI GUI implications of that?
Yeah, what I would tell you is everything in an LLM is a conversation. It's not really data driven. unless you're submitting your own data for analysis and you're telling it how to do the analysis. And so when you submit all that data, there is no one in the background. What's happening is the large language model is looking for patterns and trying to match patterns based on the stuff it's scraped off of the entire world. I think ChatGPT, they said that it was like, was it $500 million that they used to train, that they spent to train their most recent model, scraping everything around. And so I don't know that there's a lot of power. Is that I think it's probably a little more inductive than deductive, or sorry, deductive than inductive reasoning, because it's looking to match patterns. And it may come up with something you haven't thought about, but it's not probably going to come up with something that it hasn't seen somewhere.
Got it.
Whereas I think, looking at the data, you can actually find and look at new trends. And there is some data that's out there. I used it to put together some estimates for prevalence of combined cardiac and renal disease in my town. But it's a lot of that's imputed if it's not available behind a paywall.
All right, Mr. Chuck.
Let me first start by saying I just really appreciate your sharing all of your insights with us. This has been one of the best meetups we've had, just because you've shared so much valuable insight. I'm kind of curious about one thing that maybe is a little bit related to some of the professional works I do, but one of the things that is perhaps motivating use of AI is the garbage end problem. We have so much rotten data out there that is so difficult to pull anything useful out of that this LLM type model with neural networks has been able to pull out stuff that humans just don't have the patience and time to deal with. So that's part of the problem. But the other side of that problem is, how do we get that data to be better in the first place? And I would be, given your clinical perspective, I would be really interested in what you think the future is for more real-time collection of health information from patients. We have our Apple Watches, things like that. But there continues to be discussion that Apple might turn into a health company someday. Is that something that you think is highly important, or just another step on the path to better patient care?
So complex answer. So one, if you want data to be reliable, you have to make sure the collection agent is reliable. And so there are monitors that are not FDA certified or validated. And I'm not sure you want to be taking your blood pressure with one of those and then submitting it and having me alter your blood pressures. Same thing with AFib detection. If you're in atrial fibrillation, I'm not sure you want a non-validated model that's doing that. Because if I take action on that, then I hurt you if it's wrong. If it just flags you to say, hey, look, you have an irregular heart rate, it could be atrial fibrillation, go see your doctor, that's one thing. But if I then take that information and say you need to be on this medicine, and you don't have AFib and you have a side effect from it, then I think that's bad. And so I think that having real data is important. I also think that the people who are actually entering a lot of this data don't understand that this data has potential meaning. And so they're entering it at the point of care. So technicians may be entering this, typing this into the EHR, or it's flowing in and putting it into particular fields. And looking at that, I think is all a big deal in data corruption and having trouble figuring out what data is real. For example, when I was looking at some of this data I was looking at trying to look at blood sugars and predict blood sugars and discharge and readmission rates. I was like, there are 9 different places in the EHR someone's blood sugar can be put in. There are 4 different places that their blood pressure can be put in. And so if you miss one of those, then you don't have enough data to actually figure out what the prediction is. And so I think that data inaccuracy is huge. You have to have valid measures. I think some of this is very valuable, but I've had people tell me that my watch says I'm in AFib. It turns out that they're not in AFib. It turns out that they're having PVCs, and that's nothing. Or it turns out they're in ventricular tachycardia and they're going to die. And so it's making sure that we actually understand what's being measured, what the other possible alternatives are. But I do think that wearables are a big deal. But I also think that for me, this is where nudging comes in, is imagine if we send you validated devices that are hooked up to Bluetooth to your phone, and that you put on a validated blood pressure cuff when I ask you to do a blood pressure, and it sends it to me. Now I have validated information that's done at home that I can trust, that I'm willing to make a determination on.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, anybody else? So what are next steps? So let me ask you a question. So we've been listening to this, and I agree with Chuck. This has just been absolutely amazing. Could you summarize maybe 3 questions for me? So at the end of the day, what's happening? Why does it matter? And what actions should we individually be taking right now going forward?
Well, so from this, I would say that LLMs are good at providing education to subject matter experts who know how to write the questions. And so the question is, how do you develop a prompting strategy that actually gets you information and reduces hallucinations? I think the next question is, for me, on the medicine side, is how do you extend AI from LLMs to actually predictive and preventive? And then how do you ensure that that data is there that goes into models? And so how do you educate people who are applying these models into the strengths and risks and benefits and weaknesses of those models beyond LLMs? And then lastly, my personal question is, what is it that I need to do to be able to extend my personal knowledge management, to be able to see connections within all this information that I'm collecting that I may not have seen, that may give me an insight that no one has thought about before.
And again, for we're listening to this, like how would you suggest someone gets started with this?
With AI?
Yeah, with AI and this process and the tools and like if you were to say, try these 5 things and get up and running and start figuring this out. And then Mark's got a question for you.
So one, I would download the Google Prompt AI PDF and take a look at that. They've spent some time and energy figuring out how to talk about what goes into a good prompt. 2, I would probably spend some time looking at YouTube and saying, how do you design good prompts to do this? I think that's another great way to figure this out. And then I think 3 is figuring out what is your use case for this. Is this give me 5 places I can go to eat tonight in this town I've never been to before? Or is this, I would really like to make a API to be able to call to link these 2 pieces of software together. Or I would really like to be able to use Python coding to be able to design a program. And so I think it's figuring out your use case.
Mr. Anderson.
I was sort of circling this back to sort of something for Tinderbox folks here to chew on, which is an interesting thing you brought up, which was this issue of, in a sense, just moving a picture, a chart from somewhere else into the system. As we know, I mean, part of the problem is we see a picture, but sometimes it's data made into a picture, and sometimes it is a literal picture, and to most of us it's just something we don't want to bother about. But of course, at the ones and zeros level, it sort of matters. But it is really, I think that's an interesting thing for us to, certainly the backstage crew, to mull on. I mean, clearly Tinderbox wasn't originally written. It was written, in 2000, and you think about web pages now, and it's something Mark Bernstein has sort of said, one of the things he's done with his poster thing was to realize that something that would just be insanely stupid to have tried 25 years ago is now really quite possible. You can make a website that shows, you know, 1 million data points or something in a chart. So the question now becomes actually how you move these things around. And I don't claim to have an answer, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think on. Because, for instance, you might want to pull across the information behind a visualization that you know you need somewhere else, and you don't want to be wasting time. I mean, the visualization part is a known thing, even if we ourselves don't know it. So it shouldn't be the roadblock in getting from where we are to the place we want to go, which is, you know, normally to put that in front of the right audience. So I think that's an interesting thing I take away from this. It's slightly tangential to the AI, but it's a challenge that the use that you're showing brings up. So thanks.
Awesome.
Great comments.
All right. Well, we got about 5 minutes left. We don't need to necessarily take it all, but this has just been exceptional. Any other comments, thoughts before we let Andy get on back to his day? All right, Andy. Well, thank you very much. This was just exceptional. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, a quick question.
Yep.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep. Go.
Andy, would you be willing to share your knowledge management system flow diagram and its associated notes?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes,
That'd be great.
if you can email that to me, I'll post it up on the
I will.
on the when I post up the video.
I will.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. Well,
Happy Father's Day.
happy Father's Day to you, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Good job.